Money, consumption, status, and power have long driven our culture's pulse. They've shaped our motivations, our behaviors, and our beliefs. But what happens when we give art the same influence? Writers, designers, musicians, photographers, videographers, and the world's most creative minds have the power to heal us, challenge us, and guide us back home to ourselves. In their hands and through their crafts, we find a new world, one where art is a catalyst for powerful change, where self-expression, human connection, and deep empathy are the world's richest assets. This is Art is the New Wall Street, with your host, Morgan Short.
Hi, artists and creatives. Welcome back to Art is the New Wall Street. We are recording this episode on Wednesday, January 28th, following a very eventful weekend in Minneapolis. This past Friday, tens of thousands of Minnesotans marched in a general strike against ICE. Then on Saturday, a second Minneapolis citizen, Alex Pretti, was executed by ICE in broad daylight. And this comes after Renee Nicole Good's killing on January 7th and weeks of ICE terrorizing our communities here. So today I'm joined by Tran Myhre, who is a Minneapolis-based poet and activist. He's contributed to a Grammy-winning album performed at the United Nations, been a member of 2 National Poetry Slam Championships teams, and visited countless colleges and conferences and festivals using spoken word and storytelling as doorways into critical dialogue. Kyle is in Minneapolis and I'm in St. Paul, so this is really close to home. And I also recently had the opportunity to attend a workshop that he hosted about what artists can be doing in Minnesota with ICE's presence here. So Kyle, how are you really, first of all?
Yeah, I mean, as everyone knows these days, that is a very difficult question. I think even in the best of times, that's a complicated question. But I think part of the reality of when you're in these kinds of crisis moments is that it kind of clarifies like what you have to do every day. Like some of the little things that would otherwise annoy me, I can kind of just get past. And so like I feel, I don't want to use the language that is maybe overused or whatever, but I think a word that comes to mind for me is aligned. Like I feel aligned right now. That isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but I feel like I'm doing what I need to be doing.
Yeah.
How about you?
The phrase that I've been answering with that question is the horrors persist and so do I.
That's good.
Yeah. It's a nice quick one. And I agree with you. How are you is quite the loaded question anytime. But for someone who's not in Minneapolis, how would you describe the situation in Minnesota, both in terms of ICE's presence here, but also in terms of how Minnesotans are responding and organizing?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a difficult thing to wrap my head around because everyone's kind of media diets are so different, and so it's hard to imagine what everyone is seeing right now. I would imagine some people are seeing the whole picture, some people are seeing just like, oh, some bad stuff is happening, and some people are seeing nothing. I think if I had to highlight one specific thing that I would really want people to understand is kind of it's the both and of just how bad it is here. And you know, I talk about Minneapolis because I live here, but obviously it's also St. Paul, it's the suburbs, it's even other communities throughout Minnesota. And of course it's beyond Minnesota too, but because of the kind of, you know, so to speak, the eye of Sauron is here right now, like it's very, very bad. And it's very constant, and the kind of terror and intimidation and stress, there isn't really a way to take a break or unplug from it. Like it's just kind of always being on call. There's that feeling. So but when I say both and, I mean like that is existing simultaneously with how unbelievably like inspiring the last few weeks have been, and knowing that thousands of people in this community and of course throughout Minnesota and beyond like are finding ways to find their courage and just stand up for their neighbors and be there. And like that you can't like see one without seeing the other. I think it's dangerous to only focus on one or the other of just how bad it is, but then how incredible it is at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak to some of the specifics around what is happening as far as what types of organizing is happening, what types of activism is happening?
Yeah, so I'm a very visual thinker. So I think about like a continuum, whereas I think a lot of people see activism or like change work as two ends of the spectrum. Like on one end, it's like, let's work to get the candidates we like elected into office. And like, that's important work. But then on the other end, it's like, you might see the big giant protests. And that's also important work. But I do think that there's this enormous space in between that isn't necessarily related to either of those other things. And that's, I think, the most inspiring thing to me is just the everyday, on the ground, invisible, behind the scenes organizing that is happening. And again, for people who aren't here, it's difficult to describe the scope of this, just how big this project is, how decentralized it is. It isn't the project of like one organization or like, one kind of top-down leadership structure. It's block by block by block, neighbors coordinating things like resources. Like, if there's a neighbor who is vulnerable, like how do we make sure that they have rides to where they need to go? How are they getting their groceries, things like that. If there's a school in your neighborhood, it's neighbors and parents coordinating shifts. Like I'm on the southeast side of the school and I'm watching for ICE, and I'm on the northwest side of the school and I'm watching for ICE. And like every day people plug into those kinds of shifts. And I feel like a very, very brief side note is like one of the just most mind-boggling things to see over the last couple of weeks is how kind of hyper terminally online right-wing reactionaries are seeing this, and it's blowing their minds. They're like, we have nothing like this on the right. These people must be paid by, the Chinese Communist Party or whatever to be doing this, right. When it's just, they can't understand that people actually care about each other, right, in a community like this. And that's what we're seeing. It's just care. Compounded 1,000%.
Yeah, that is something that has been bringing me so much hope. Like I walk up to a business and see one of those signs even that just says all are welcome here except ICE. Like it just brings me hope. Seeing my neighbors and the community just providing mutual aid, providing resources, standing up for each other, it's the thing that's bringing me hope. And I have felt very hopeless and powerless this month. So I think we're starting to come out of that for me personally. But I want to talk specifically about what artists can do, and start with asking you about what inspired you, motivated you to start hosting or to host that workshop a couple weeks back.
Yeah, I mean, a couple thoughts. One is that I think the question of what artists can do is just happens to be because I'm an artist and I'm in community with artists. But it's a question that like anyone can ask. Like if you're a healthcare professional, you might facilitate a workshop on like what can healthcare professionals do in this moment. Or if you're a teacher, you might have an all-school assembly to talk about the role of the teacher in this moment and like what can educators do. And so like it's more about, on one level, just everyone figuring out what is the unique thing that you have to offer because of the discipline you're a part of or the community you're a part of or the spaces you have access to.
Right.
And then the other side of it, why I want to do this, is that this has been a running theme in my work my whole career, has been thinking about how art... So again, the normal, quote unquote, like everyday, like common conversation we have about art and activism is usually about the kind of the deeper spiritual hope and inspiration side of art. Like art helps us imagine a better world, and it gives us space to vision and experiment. And like, of course, all that stuff is really, really important. I don't want to discount it, but I'm really interested, just personally, I'm a very practical, down to earth thinker, for better or worse. And so I'm really interested in the ways in which, for example, an artist is a person who often has access to a group of, say, 100 other people. If you're a performer, you're on stage in front of 100 other people. And like that kind of snapshot is really fascinating to me. And I think about how much power flows through access to spaces, access to people. And so wanted to put together this kind of workshop or this space to kind of explore this idea of the power that we have as artists, that is not just I can write a cool poem or I can write an inspiring song, but is more based on these kind of super down-to-earth practical considerations about the power that we have via our access to space, audiences, skills, things like that. I will say very briefly, like I think it also comes a little bit just from being annoyed and I don't want, I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to like be super specific here, but just seeing certain artists who have enormous platforms doing nothing with those platforms. And it isn't necessarily even about like the responsibility, like you must speak out right now. It's also like an opportunity. Like, why not speak out right now? Like, if you have access to thousands and thousands of people, like, you may as well share something with them. But yeah, that's maybe another conversation.
No, I want to actually follow up on that, because I think what you're saying is really important. Having a platform means having a responsibility. And so what's your philosophy on, you've got a pretty solid platform yourself on using your voice in moments like this?
Yeah, I think I hesitate with it because I think it's a conversation a lot of people just don't want to have. There's a very, and sometimes understandable strain of like, I'm an artist, this is the work that I do, don't expect me to be something else or to be a spokesperson for the people. And on one level, I actually respect that. Like, some people are only on social media to self-promote, and they don't use it as a tool in the way that some other people, like, their entire identity is wrapped up in their social media profile. And so, like, I want to give a little bit of grace to these kind of other considerations, but at the same time, like, in a crisis moment where it is all hands on deck, like, I do want to push a little bit and say, like, there is some measure of responsibility when you have some kind of platform. And it doesn't matter, whether it's 500, 5,000 or 500,000, like, we can think about platform in a very multidimensional way. I think, for me, the kind of guiding principle that I try to come back to is I don't have to position myself as an expert, and I don't want to position myself as an authority. You see this a lot with influencers, but I think it leaks over into artists too, of like, I'm going to stare into my selfie camera and tell you exactly what you should do and what you should believe. And like, there are moments where personal kind of narrative is important and you should do that. But in a broader sense, I think it's really important to use what platforms we have as a bullhorn for the voices who we should be listening to, right? So right now, immigrant-led organizations, people who are doing the organizing work, people who are trying to plug people into this rapid response work, like, how do we use our platforms to open doors for our audiences to find those voices?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, that was really good. So another thing I wanted to mention about the workshop that you did is you originally, it was going to be like, what, a few couple people, and 500 people showed up to it? How did that shift what you were planning for that workshop?
Yeah, and I mean, for other artists or, artist activists or artist educators who do virtual programming, like, you promote something and you're happy if 20, 30 people show up for like a workshop or something. And I think for this, the original idea was I'd anticipate mostly a super local audience, some like Twin Cities artists, maybe brainstorming, like, what is a cool fundraiser we could do together? Let's like plant the seeds for that and move on it. But then, I think we had 1,200 people register, and like every time I looked at the registration, it was shooting up. So we actually had to cut it off before it got to like 5,000. And then, also with online stuff, only half the people actually show up, but that's okay. Like, still, a 500 person virtual event, it can be really powerful. And I think the shift that happened was just being a little less, let's have a big wide open conversation. And it forced me and my co-facilitator Wing T to kind of like think a little bit more presentation-y, for better or worse. And like, that's not what I want to be as an educator, but sometimes like it's okay. And so it really, I'll just speak for myself. It forced me to think a lot about what are like the 5 main big takeaway points that I want to share. Not because I'm an expert or because I know everything, just based on my experience of having done this, having had this conversation with thousands of people all around the country in the course of my actual kind of day job work. What can I pass on or be a conduit for that can be useful to other people? And that's a key word, like, what is useful and practical that artists in my community can put to work, like, kind of right away.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of those practical, useful things that artists can do right now.
Yeah. So I think the way that the workshop was structured, I think the first one that we talked about, not because it's the most important, but because it's maybe the clearest example of what we're talking about here, is fundraising. Right? Like, an artist can use their platform and their access to audiences and people to move money around or to share resources, or, you know, a benefit show at the local club, or you're a crafter and you do a raffle where like I'll send you this thing that I knitted, and if you buy a $5 raffle ticket you get a chance to win it. Like a silent auction. Like there are all these different examples of how artists, whether visual artists or performing artists, can kind of mobilize people to give. And in a moment like this, where there is so much hyper local work happening, neighborhood to neighborhood, block to block here in Minnesota, like, I think it's also important to know that, like, it isn't just you make $1 million donation to the ACLU, right? Like, right. If someone can do that, that's cool. Yeah. But if you can mobilize 20 people to each give $10 to like your local, like, on your block, like the church that has a food shelf or whatever, like that is meaningful. And so it isn't just big, like everyone can be a philanthropist. Even if you have no money at all, like you can help organize a thing through your artistic community to get other people to show up and give money. And so like I love that as an example of, again, we're thinking really, really down to earth. Doesn't even matter if the art itself is good. Doesn't even matter if the art itself is political. It's just like, can you get a bunch of people together to give some money? And I love that as an example.
Yeah, that's a great example. What is something that anyone should understand first before they step into activism, if, for example, they haven't, like, at all?
I mean, I could teach a semester-long course on that question, but I do think, you know, maybe the key word is just humility. To be like, on one level, yes, like we want people to be fired up. We want people to really want to show up and get involved. Like that's important. Like hold on to that kind of internal kind of fuel and energy. But the humility piece, I think, is that understanding that if you are new to this work, there are a lot of people who are not and who are already doing amazing stuff. And the goal maybe isn't to rebuild the wheel or like start your own nonprofit right away. The goal might be to do some research, like have conversations with people, do a little online research, like what kind of work is already happening in your community, and then how can you support that work? How can you contribute to it, join it, donate to it, whatever that might mean. So I think humility is really important. While, like I said, while at the same time keeping that sense of urgency a little bit. A lot of this is about balance. And, you know, some of the same stuff about organizing relates back to an artistic practice too. Like wanting to be thoughtful and wanting to think about your craft while also sometimes like you just got to speak out. Like that same balance that an artist might feel can also be relevant to people getting involved in activism and organizing for the first time. I could talk more about that. Actually, I know this is a goofy thing to say in 2026, but my TED Talk that I did was all about the ways that the creative process of like writing a poem or a song mirrors the way people get involved in activism for the first time. Wow. So like, how do you take something really, really big and how do you make it small so that it makes sense? How do you, you know, not overthink it and kind of dive into it? Like all those kinds of questions.
You gave a TED Talk? That's awesome.
This was like 10 years. I mean, not 10 years ago, but a very long time ago.
You get the question around, what would you give a TED Talk on? And you've given one. So that's very cool. Good for you. I think you said something about how artists, like, it's not that we're special. It's that like you have to think about your identity in the community that you're in, and then, you know, figure out what kind of skills you can bring to the contribution. And do you have anything like more to say on that, or is that basically what you meant when you said, you know, as artists, like we're not special per se?
Yeah, I mean, it's another one of these questions where there's a little bit of a balance to it, in that I think we're not special in the sense that we're not more important in the larger scheme of the struggle. Like everyone is important in their own ways, whatever discipline or field or career or neighborhood or whatever. Like we're all contributing, we're all pushing the rock in the same direction. But then also, I mean, part of the workshop is not necessarily what is special about us, but what are we uniquely positioned as artists to offer? Yeah. And so, I mean, I just shared just off the top of my head another really concrete example. We talked about fundraising. Another thing that came up in the conversation was like, if you are, say, a performing artist, like a musician, or, you know, I'm a spoken word poet, like other types of people who are up in front of audiences a lot, it can be as simple as, you know, you already have a merch table where you sell your t-shirts or your vinyl or your books or whatever you're selling. Like, use the merch table as a space to like share other things, right? It could be inviting a local organizer to come and like, give flyers out for the new event. Actually, I have one in front of me. I made this little zine, kind of based off the event. It's called For Artists, Writers, and Other Creative Troublemakers. And it's just like a little 8-page zine of like everything I would want to share with people right now about getting involved, about finding their way into the work. There's a page of like local poems that I want to signal boost in this moment. Just like little resources like that. Maybe it's a basket of whistles and like the whistle zine. Like there are so many things we could do that are, again, very down to earth. It isn't about big existential artistic philosophy stuff. It's like this super down to earth thing. And going back to your question about like why are artists special, I do think part of it is that artists have access to audiences that organizers do not always have access to.
Yeah, good point.
And of course there's some overlap. Like if you're me and you're like a movement artist, like people who listen to my music are probably plugged in some way. But like, if you're touring through smaller town Minnesota because you're in an indie band, like that's a really powerful thing to be. If you're a rapper, like you have access to all these different audiences, and like that can be, there's possibility there.
Two things. Firstly, just that like any small action can bring us hope. Like even for me, like I have been so paralyzed, just outraged, and attending a training, attending a workshop, just like any sort of action during the day has really been useful for my like personal nervous system. And then secondly, zine. Can you tell the audience what that is? Because I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with what those are.
Yeah.
Or did you say zine?
So it is zine, like a little magazine. Like
okay,
that's like
got you.
That's how I tell people to remember it. But before I want to pull out one thread of something you just said that I think is really important. The idea that like when we feel overwhelmed, do something. And like that, it doesn't have, the thing itself doesn't even matter, but like find something you can do, some way to plug in, because like taking one step leads to the next step. Like going to one event leads to the next thing. And like that, I think is a really elegant way of thinking about when we do feel overwhelmed, not having to have the answer, but just like finding some way to show up. But yeah, so going back to zines, I mean, and it's related to some extent, like for people, it's like a generational thing. Like I feel like people older than me know about it because it's like the, not everyone, but like it's like a Gen X thing. Like during like the Riot Girl, like punk, like people made little booklets about their favorite bands, or like, of course it goes back older than that too. You can think about like the little kind of mini newspapers from like the Harlem Renaissance, or like the little revolutionary pamphlets people made. But the idea is that it's a small like self-published paper booklet, right? And I also feel like people younger than me, like kind of the Gen Z era of people, know about zines. They've kind of made a weird comeback. But then a lot of people my own age like have never heard the term before. So anyone listening to this, like don't feel bad. It's a very kind of underground thing. But I love the idea of them, is that like whatever you are interested in, whatever information you want to share, you can make a little self-published paper booklet. And the idea is it doesn't have to be through like a publishing press. You make a bunch of copies yourself. Maybe your friend works at a business where they can steal free copies or whatever, but and then you just give them out for free. Put them in coffee shops, put them in libraries, give them to your friends. So like, again, a lot of zine culture is like kind of goofy. And I don't want to say goofy in a bad way, like just goofy, like slice of life stuff. Like, here's a zine about like all the different faces that my cat makes, and like that's beautiful. I've always kind of leaned, just based on what my career is, into like zine being a concrete physical thing I can hand to somebody. That maybe has more resources or more ways to get involved. So like a lot of, again, my like day job work stuff is like I might go to a college and do a presentation on like consent or gender-based violence prevention. And I want to have zines then that are like, if you're new to this topic, like here are a bunch of more things you can read, here are a bunch of more resources, and like the zines are just free. You don't have to buy them or anything. I just give them out after the performance. And then, in a time like this, like a zine of, here are very specific things people can do to push back against this kind of ICE occupation of our community. Because again, I don't want to ramble too much here, but just briefly, like, I think a lot of people who are kind of plugged in kind of know what the call to action is, right? Like find your rapid response groups, take one of those legal observer trainings, like support mutual aid efforts, all that kind of stuff. But there's a huge amount of people who have no idea. who are like, I'm going to call the governor and I'm going to try to get the governor to send the National Guard in to fight the federal agents, which like is just never going to happen. Like the police are not on our side. The National Guard are not on our side. And so like, and I use that as one specific example of just the broader idea that some people do not have a background in like social change or movements or activism or what calls to action are. And so like a zine being a very, very small, simple doorway. It doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't give you everything you'll ever need to know, but it can connect you to like the next link, the next step in the journey.
So I'm 33, so I'm a millennial, and you like nailed it. I had never heard of a zine before your workshop, and then I was looking at your website, getting to know you a little bit better, and I was like, oh, these are super cool, and I want to make one.
Well, I should say, I'm sorry, I forget when this is airing, but the Twin Cities Zine Festival is Saturday, February 7th. And
Really?
I'm gonna have my little, I have a mobile, it's like a big cooler box that flips up, and I have kind of a mobile zine library, and so I'm gonna be at the Zine Festival this year, giving out a bunch of zines on
There's
a
a
bunch of
zine
topics.
festival?
There are a couple different zine festivals in the Twin Cities, and then of course all
God.
over the country too.
I
But yeah,
love it.
the big Twin Cities Zine Festival is Saturday, February 7th at the Central Library downtown.
So Kyle, I actually like when I was attending the workshop, I don't know how I happened upon it. I think I saw it on my social media feed, and then as I was listening to you, I was looking at your website again, getting to know you a little bit better, and then I realized that I had seen multiple of your spoken word poems out on YouTube. So Kyle is also a spoken word poet. If you've ever seen, let's make sure that I get this right, but if you've ever seen the viral poem 10 responses to the phrase man up, that was Kyle. So my mind was kind of blown as I was sitting in on that workshop that was you.
I've had a very interesting, I don't want to talk about myself too much, but I'm just at a very interesting place in my career where like I've been around long enough and I've had enough kind of viral moments where I go visit a city or a community and like no one knows who I am, but then once I start talking, they're like, oh yeah, like whether it's the 10 responses to the phrase man up thing or the Fred again thing, like the Grammy award winning EDM artist, like I've collaborated with him a couple times, and like it's super super random. No one expects that. But yeah, I've had a couple other poems kind of have their big viral moments for better or worse. But it's an interesting place to be as an artist in that like again I'm not famous. I don't get to like draw thousands of people just because of my name, but I've been able to do some cool stuff over the years.
Love that you contributed to the Fred again, because I love EDM. I go to festivals all over, so that's really cool. I was fangirling over that too. Okay, so to bring us back into art and activism and what's going on in Minnesota, I wanted to just share like where I'm at. I have mentioned this sort of, alluded to it, but I have just felt so much outrage. So much so that it was paralyzing for multiple weeks, especially after Renee, Nicole Good was killed. And you actually had a graphic that really helped me like think a little bit more logically about my emotions and what they were doing to me. I don't know if you have that like ready that you could pull up, but it was in the workshop, and you had this graphic that you shared that basically like outrage was at the center of it, and how outrage can be both paralyzing, but then it can also help you move into something that's productive for the cause.
This is a kind of visual that I'm very proud of. I think is really useful, but I can totally understand people being really mad at me about it, because the basic idea of it is that it's a spectrum of like if you're posting on social media, and of course it's beyond social media. It's like if you are transmitting political information, if you're talking about what's going on in the world, it's a spectrum between what is most helpful and most useful and what is less helpful and less useful. And again, I want to just affirm that not everyone uses social media to be helpful. Some people are just trying to vent, and that's not what they're thinking. And so I'm not talking about them. This is for people who want to like contribute to the extent that posting on social media is any contribution at all. And I don't think it's not. Like I do think there is something about the larger narrative work that we're doing, and like the posts don't do anything on their own, but kind of as a cumulative thing can push a conversation a certain way. And so I wanted to try to capture that a little bit in a visual. And so just so people can get it, if you're only listening through the audio, at the very, very top, like the most helpful thing people can do, at least in my experience, it says signal boosting. So like amplifying the kind of calls to action, the asks, the information that organizers are sharing. So like in this case, again, immigrant-led organizations, people who are on the ground doing the work, who know what they're talking about. I think the best thing we can do is share what they're sharing. And then, stepping down, I won't go through the entire image, but like stepping down, it's like, just sharing information in general. So like maybe a good like NPR story interview about what's happening, or local media like Racket or Sahan Journal or whatever. Maybe you have a personal story because something impacted you personally, and like you can share that. And then of course, on the other end of the spectrum at the bottom is stuff like just kind of spreading panic and misinformation and disinformation, just posting everything you see, whether it's from some random influencer who does not live here and has no idea what they're talking about, or just like rumors and like a screenshot of a Reddit post that someone made a TikTok video about that is now being shared on Instagram, like that kind of stuff. And then, kind of the armchair quarterbacking, the like cynicism, the whole like, we're cooked, that kind of stuff. But then what you were talking about in the middle, because I don't think it's necessarily good or bad, but in the middle is this idea of outrage, like just sharing that, like, I am outraged about this. Mm-hmm. And where I think that can be good is where it's mobilizing, the idea that like, I'm really, really angry, I'm really, really outraged, and I'm going to commit, and I call on all the people I'm connected to commit to doing something about it. So the idea that outrage can be mobilizing, can give us forward momentum. And then I think the flip side of that is when outrage is demobilizing, when it's like, I'm really, really angry, I'm really fired up, and we are doomed. Yeah. This fight is already over. They've already won. I'm so mad that they've already won. And like, it sounds, I'm not doing a good job explaining it, but like, that's a very, very real thing, especially on social media, the kind of we're cooked idea. And then right in the middle between those two is just the idea of like, I'm mad. And like, that's one, I think it's good to share that. Like, it's good for people to express themselves, but it isn't connected to any like call to action or like, or more information. It's just like, And again, that isn't good or bad. It's natural to just share that. What I try to do, and this relates to a longer conversation about art and creating art in these kinds of moments. And I think about what I call the anthemic impulse of that is, the anger, the grief, the fury, the spite that is mobilizing, that gets us fired up and ready to move forward. Like, I think that's really important. And I would encourage people to maybe just think a little more critically about, is my outrage mobilizing or demobilizing?
Can you say that again? What you called that?
Yeah, I actually run a whole workshop at some points on the concept of the anthemic impulse, like anthem. It's like, usually we think about that term in terms of like a national anthem, but I think about it more broadly as art that has just a tonal level, this like forward momentum. And like, I don't want to use the word positivity because I think that has a lot of baggage, so it isn't necessarily positive. It can still be angry, it can still be very like sharp edged, but it is about possibility, it's about hope. The visual I often use, and I can explain this because I think people will be familiar with it, is like in the I think the third Lord of the Rings movie, when the orcs are attacking Gondor, and the leader Denethor is like, flee, abandon your posts, flee for your lives. And then Gandalf knocks him on the head and says, prepare for battle. So like in that scene, Denethor is demobilizing outrage, and Gandalf is this kind of anthemic impulse of like, we're gonna win, we're gonna fight no matter what, tend to your go to your battle stations, or whatever he says.
So this for me also, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Don't be mad at me. Don't judge me. But I have not seen Lord of the Rings. Oh, wow. But every year I make a 26 for 26, or like here's the 26 things I'm gonna do in 2026, and one of them is to watch all of Lord of the Rings, because I can't believe that as a writer I haven't seen this movie, Yeah, I'm just, it's a shame. That
I have no judgment, no judgment.
But yeah, I am also playing my first D&D campaign. Wow. So they were like, you should watch Lord of the Rings. One thing that I wanted to say about this graphic, though, is I know it's taking a look at the lens of like social media and what's useful on there, but it made a light bulb go off in my head when you showed this, just about how my outrage was definitely demobilizing me. Like it was, I was filled with resentment for anyone who like can't see what's going on. And some of those included, you know, people in my, you know, not tight circle, but people in my like community. And yeah, it was definitely demobilizing. And seeing that 2 weeks ago made me take more action. So thank you for that graphic. And it's just a testament to the work that you do and how it can ripple through and affect people that you aren't even impact people that you aren't even aware of. So
yeah, I mean that's really affirming to hear. And I mean, on the same hand, I also want to affirm for other people that like the kind of the point of the graphic and kind of the conversation we're having now is what we do with our feelings, and that I think is something we can think really critically about. But like the feelings themselves are neutral, right? Like if you feel hopeless, that's okay. Like if you feel despair or anger at all the people around you, like that is 100% valid, and like it is okay to have the feelings. I think the question is always like, when I have the feelings, what do I want to do with them? And that's hopefully where that graphic can maybe be a little bit useful to some people.
there's something that people said to me for multiple days when I was feeling so paralyzed was put the phone down. And I totally understand the intention behind that and they mean well, but also it feels kind of a little bit dismissive. Like, hello, look at everything going on in our community right now. Like, how are you not fired up? You know, like match my emotions. But also on the other hand, like our human brains aren't meant for this like constant information, this constant like panic, and like the algorithms are literally set up to like bait you. So anything to say there?
It's a perfect example of how social media discourse works, and that like social media discourse for the past decade plus has been very binary, right? It's either this thing is perfectly good in every way or this thing is perfectly evil in every way. And I think advice like put the phone down is 100% valid sometimes and 100% invalid other times. Like it depends on the situation. It depends on who is telling you it and like why they're like, you know, if someone's like, put the phone down and just like, it's okay, like positive vibes. Like, of course that's bad advice. But if it's someone saying, put the phone down because it is denying you your agency to act because all you're doing is doom scrolling, then that's good advice, right? And so like we have to be able to pick apart that kind of advice a little bit, especially on social media. But I mean, you know, of course it happens in real life too, in our everyday relationships. And yeah, I do think that there is a time for, let me say it like this. I think about, you know, social media and digital activism as a tool, as one tactic in what must be a larger tapestry of tactics. It isn't necessarily good or bad on its own. I think there are platforms that are maybe bad on their own, but the larger idea of posting and like sharing information online, like for better or worse, it's the world in which we live. And so I think it's worth thinking about and being tactical about. But at the same time, it can never be all the work. Like it always has to be a piece of this larger thing.
Social media is definitely interesting, and there's lots of gray areas, especially with those who are controlling social media. Was it just this weekend that TikTok, the US sold? What was it? What happened with TikTok this
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if listeners want the whole story, but basically, I think the big takeaway is TikTok is now owned by a very dangerous American,
Larry
someone
Ellison.
who is aligned with the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And like TikTok was dangerous before, but like now it's just gonna get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, it like shut off over the weekend. There was like a new terms thing, and then I was like, "Is this Oracle and Larry Ellison?"
Yeah, and it was the same. I mean, same with Twitter. Like, I really enjoyed Twitter. I ended up leaving in 2023, kind of just as the Musk stuff was getting worse and worse and worse. And I, you know, it hasn't it hasn't been difficult. Like that feels like a really good choice to make. I think not being on TikTok feels like a good choice to make. And yet I'm still on Instagram, which is owned by Meta, which in many ways is just as dangerous and just as harmful as some of these other ones. And so we all have to have, I think, difficult conversations about ethics and social media, and that's maybe another project for the near horizon, or a zine or something.
Yes. Where can people find your zines?
Yeah, so you mentioned I do try to keep digital accessible versions on my website, which is just guante.info/zines, or like, if you go to guante.info, or you just Google me, like you'll be able to find it, and there's a tab that says zines, and so all the kind of readable versions are there, and then the physical versions, which I print out and share for free, are usually just at performances. So if I'm playing a show somewhere, I'll have my little zine library with me. Yeah.
Do you have any examples of fellow Minnesotan artists that are out there right now doing some activism, making cool art, or what have you, or organizations too, not just artists?
Yeah, I mean, the difficult thing with that question is that there are so many, right? And if I will not in any way try to give anyone like a full rundown of the whole scene, but like I can give some shout outs, and just know that those shout outs are just kind of guiding stars that point to entire constellations, to use the poetry metaphor, right, of the work that is happening. And so I think about one, I think one of the most inspiring things I've seen I'm a performer, right? I come from poetry, from music, but visual artists I think have really been leading the way in a lot of ways over the past few weeks. Poster art, like big kind of poster campaigns, really, really incredible work happening. In the notes from the event, which if people weren't at the event that we've been talking about, the virtual workshop, all of the notes and slides are freely available. That's also at my website. And in those slides, we share a bunch of examples of Marlena Miles and Sean Lim and Burlesque and See More Perspective and like Ricardo Levins Morales, like all these incredible visual arts making like powerful, inspiring, morale boosting visual art about this moment. And again, in practical terms, the cool thing about visual art is that it isn't just the art, it's the way that art kind of lives in our community. When you can walk down Central Avenue and see these posters in every business, these kind of, ice out of Minneapolis posters, you see them all over. I think that's really powerful. I've also been trying to keep a list at my site of poets, just because I come from the poetry community, of like poets who are addressing this moment. And of course, there are a million poets who have a million poems that are relevant, but I'm talking about like poets writing stuff in the last 2 weeks that has been really good. And there's so much, Ali Schminke is one of my favorites, Muna Abdullahi, Ed Bockley, Tish Jones, again, See More Perspective, who I mentioned. Like the list goes on, but like people who are kind of responding to the moment as it happens. And I think that is one function of poetry that gets forgotten about sometimes. It isn't just about being timeless. It is also about being timely and like being present in your community, talking about what's happening. And then of course, again, I won't ramble on, but I also think about, like a musical group like Brass Solidarity that plays like at protests and at actions.
No, I was just going to ask you about music too, because I, a couple weeks ago, started a playlist called like Resistance and Revolution in Minnesota. And I just kept finding myself going back to like classic examples of music and poetry, or not poetry, protest music. Like Sam Cooke is on there, and like Where's the Love from Black Eyed Peas, and like I don't know, a bunch of just like classic ones, and not like current Minnesotan. Like I want more local musicians, and I want more people that are doing stuff right now.
Well, I can shout out so the organization Teacup, the Twin Cities United Performers. They started out a while back as kind of organizing musicians in terms of like, when we play a show at a venue, is the communication solid? Are we getting the money that we've been promised? So kind of thinking about musicians as laborers, right? As workers. So that's kind of their thing. But they've also, in the last couple of weeks, done like a call for local art about ICE and about the occupation. And like, so they just have, I don't know if they have a story archive on their Instagram or what, but like people have been sharing their songs and then tagging them. So if you look at like their tagged things on Instagram, hundreds and hundreds of, I don't know if hundreds and hundreds, but many, many, many local artists writing songs about what is happening right now. I also, you know, in my own experience, I think about local artists who, not even just right now, but just throughout the 20 years that I've lived here, have been actively speaking out about things that matter. So like Maria Issa, who's an incredible performer, but then also went on to become a state rep, right? Maria Issa, or like 2 for 1, you know, Nerdy, See More Perspective, all these really cool people.
Thank you for all of that. I'm going to go back and re-listen to that because I just want all of it. Get it in my orbit.
Yeah.
Okay, if you could give a piece of advice to any artist, whether they're in Minnesota or not, who wants to meet this moment, what would that be?
I'm not trying to be funny here, but again, as a very, very practical, down-to-earth thinker, I think what I would ask people to do is go read the notes from our event. Not because it's like me promoting myself, like go to my website and check out my stuff, but because the notes have everything I would want to share. Right. So like what the specific calls to action are right now for everybody, not just artists. So like that's kind of a starting point, a baseline of like what is the work that is happening now. And then the rest of the notes are about how can artists support that work. So stuff we've already talked about fundraising and kind of using artist space as activist space, using the audiences we have access to, amplifying movement messages, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing is about those notes is that they're full of very, very concrete examples. And so it isn't like one thing, because every artist kind of occupies different space and has different identities that they hold, different levels of safety themselves. And so it isn't like one thing, but I do think there's a lot of stuff in the notes that artists can hopefully pull one thing from. Yeah, I hope that's not a cop-out answer.
It's not a cop-out answer, and I'll definitely include it in the show notes here too, if you're willing to share the links.
Yeah.
Okay, so just a few questions to wrap up. Talking about you as an artist, I'm curious to know when you first realized that you had a voice, when you first realized that spoken word was a thing for you. What was your coming to be an artist experience like?
Yeah, I mean, this is a story I tell a lot because I work with kids. Like a lot of the work that I do today is kind of residency work. I'll go to a high school or a middle school and teach poetry classes for a week, and then go to a different school and teach for 3 days, like et cetera, et cetera. And so a story I often tell to that audience, because let's be real, like 99% of the students in a high school, you know, ELA program are not interested in spoken word poetry. And so I really have to drive home the point that like when I was in school, I was also not interested in spoken word poetry or creative writing. I mean, maybe a little bit, but you know, I was a football player and I hung out with my friends and I played video games and just kind of the quote unquote kind of normal young man stuff. And the reason that I got into this work, into expression and art and writing, was not because of some deep internal drive that like, I want to express myself. It was all because of community, right? So having people around me who would invite me to stuff or encourage me to share something. And I think that's, you know, a big misconception about artists is that you are born with this kind of outgoing theater kid impulse. And like if you are, that's awesome, like that's a head start. But I think a deeper reality, at least for me, and I think for a lot of other people too, is that it's very much about the communities we find ourselves in. So when I was 18, I lived in Madison, Wisconsin, and in that specific couple of years that I lived there, it was a burgeoning spoken word kind of slam poetry scene, and a burgeoning blooming hip hop scene, and like a bunch of really cool people doing really cool work, both around the arts, but also around activism and community, and like all those things kind of intertwined. And I just had friends who were like, hey, come with me to this open mic, right? Yeah. Or like, hey, come with me to this organizing meeting about the campaign that's happening. And I think that notion of having friends who invite you to stuff is an undertold story when it comes to how people find themselves in this kind of work.
Yeah, and saying yes when they
Yeah,
invite
that's
you.
true too.
Yeah. I was also in Madison, Wisconsin when I was 18.
Oh wow.
I went to UW. Did you?
Yeah, same.
Oh, look at that. And for you, I mean, right now, the situation, the world is just so heavy. What keeps you creating?
Again, two thoughts here. One is that, I just haven't really been a lot because things are so hectic, and because I have other responsibilities and I'm going around my neighborhood, with my whistle and all that kind of stuff. Like, there isn't a ton of time, not even just time in a literal sense, but kind of mental, spiritual, emotional space to like sit down and write a poem. And so on one level, I just haven't been, and I do think that is okay. If you are an artist out there, like, you don't always have to be producing. And at the same time, when I have actually been able to write something, it's usually been fueled by spite and anger.
Yeah.
And that is also okay, right? And like, we could also say grief, like writing from a place of grief and fury, like, that's okay. If it helps you get some words down on the page, like, embrace that, like, embrace the dark side or whatever you want to call it. And that, yeah, I think you find the inspiration where you can find it, whether the inspiration is like a positive or not. And so, yeah, that's kind of the balance I've been trying to have.
What you just said reminds me of the 4 energies coined by Bill O'Hanlon. It's this framework of blessed, dissed, pissed, and blissed, and what motivates you as a writer to actually create. I definitely am someone that only creates mostly when I'm pissed off. So
Yeah.
I resonate with what you said. Okay, and Kyle, in preparing for this episode, I did ask you if you wanted to share any of your poetry or any of your work. I'd love to give you the opportunity to do that if there's anything that you want to share.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing we talked about is, like, I'm very online, for better or worse, and if people want to read my poems, like, they're all over the internet. And the poems that have gone viral, poems that have not gone viral, like, I have a book from Button Poetry and stuff, and so, like, it's very easy just to play a video or something, but I figured it would maybe make sense to share something based on what we just talked about, right? So, like, I've been writing a ton lately, but what I have been writing has been kind of built out of or rooted in this kind of spite. And I don't think it makes the work good or bad. It's just like you find the fuel that you have access to. And so I figured I would share a short piece about what is happening right now in my community that kind of came from that process. So this is a poem that kind of has 2 parts, and I'll read the whole thing, but the actual, like, poem is the second part. The first part is just kind of setup for it. And so, yeah, you can decide what you want to use.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kyle.
And the poem is called Discourse, with the subtitle, Let Your Heart Be a Whistle. And the stand-up comedian laments, everyone is so sensitive these days. You can't say anything anymore. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem announces she wants to ban visitors from, quote, every damn country that's been flooding our nation with killers, leeches, and entitlement junkies, unquote. And the editorial board laments, college students have a right to protest, but must be held accountable for their divisive rhetoric. Minnesota Representative and Majority Whip of the U.S. House Tom Emmer lies, stating that 80% of the crimes being committed in the Twin Cities in Minnesota are being committed by Somalis. And the public intellectual laments, people are getting canceled over the most trivial things these days. The President of the United States rants, Ilhan Omar is garbage, her friends are garbage, we don't want them, let them go back to where they came from. And the celebrity laments, I hate politics. I don't believe in either side, because if you're on either side, you're supporting division. And Vice President J.D. Vance says, it is totally reasonable and acceptable for American citizens to look at their next door neighbors and say, I want to live next to people who I have something in common with. I don't want to live next to 4 families of strangers. And the poet laments, 4 families of strangers, 1 child from each. My grandparents. You wouldn't know them. They never had a podcast. They weren't perfect, but they weren't fascists. And when the flood came, they didn't drink it, but they also didn't pretend it wasn't there. Decades before I was born, they quietly moved their strange families to higher ground. Some had skin so light no border could weigh them down. Others had to be creative. Decades after I was born, I run out of words. Racist, bootlicking bullies and cowards. All true, all insufficient. And when the discourse of power is evil on one side and indifference on the other, let your heart be a whistle, loud, piercing, taking up as much space as possible, a reminder that the call is not to say something perfect, it is to make noise, a reminder that there is no language more divisive than the truth, a reminder that in the right moment, something very small can bring something very large to its knees. For every so-called family of strangers, welcome. Make yourself at home. Make yourself a home here. Did you know that remembering the past and imagining the future light up the same networks in our brains? My grandparents, whether by blood or bibliography, taught me to remember where I come from. My grandchildren, whether by blood or water rippling, teach me to remember where I stand. Yeah, snaps.
Yeah, that was, wow. Thank you for sharing that, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I say this about poetry a lot, but like, and not to be self-deprecating, but like, this isn't the kind of poem that's going to get like published in the New Yorker or like get poetry accolades, but it's the kind of poem that I can stand up in front of a crowd and like put my spirit into, because it's honest, it's saying what I want to say right now. And I feel like, again, when we talk about the functions of art in moments like this, it can partly be for bringing people into the work and for inspiring other people, but it's also for you as an artist. Like, what makes you feel aligned or right. Absolutely. Standing up and saying something out loud.
Absolutely. It's expression that matches the moment and how you're feeling. And it's motivating me to go write something, because I just haven't been creating. So thank you for sharing that. And
thank you.
It does seem like you have been writing, because that seems fairly recent. And again, Kyle, thank you for your contributions and your voice, and your activism. This conversation was extremely helpful to me, and I'm sure it'll be helpful to our listeners too.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, and to our listeners, keep creating, keep making magic, and as always, remember that your art is a gift to you in the world. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Art is the New Wall Street. If you liked what you heard today, give our show a follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can find us on social media or at artistthenewwallstreet.com. Keep creating, and we'll see you next time.